My favourite one.
You're losing it, man.
My favourite one. Captain Handsome Face. Look at this. Oh, sexy boy. Sexy boy. Look at you, you've got a proper... Oh, I've got a frot on in that picture.
I do not have a frot on.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Hello.
How are you?
We're all right. Thank you for having us.
And basically, that was a trailer of one of your episodes, right?
This is from what, like 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Like, this is episode 100.
Oh, wow.
And when we got to 100, we thought, I can't believe we got to 100.
But now we're just round the corner from 400.
And that'll be on the 6th of September.
Yes.
So tell me a bit more about your podcast.
So
We are.
Cheapshow.
Yes, thank you.
I'm Paul.
I'm Eli. Hi.
Hello, nice to meet you.
No, don't touch me.
Okay, fine. And yeah, we started Cheapshow years and years ago. To cut a very, very long story short, we used to do stand-up a lot, improv, sketches. Nice. And then the industry was kind of, I don't know, I was rubbish at stand-up.
I was pretty good, but really lazy.
Yeah.
It's hard stand-up, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know loads of people who are in stand-up.
It's terribly hard. It was hard then, but I think I look at the sort of scene now, what I can see of it, and think, wow, it must be impossible now.
Yeah, so we decided to ditch out and do a podcast instead.
Fair enough,
Because
yeah.
a lot of people at the time, especially in comedy, were almost sniffy about podcasts. It was like, no, I'm going to focus on the live show, the gigs, the Edinburgh runs. And then we kind of pivoted to doing this.
It was seen as supplementary, something you did
On
in
the
support
side.
of other more important, legitimate career things in comedy, like stand-up, sketch shows, TV, But now the whole world has changed, hasn't it? And like you look at someone, I know we don't want to be compared to them.
Who?
The biggest podcast in the world, Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
He's like the kingmaker for stand-ups now, but it's all to do with his podcast.
Amazing.
So it's almost like the podcast is.
Well, that's the industry for him.
Has replaced it now. So it's almost like podcasts are more central than they were considered back when we started.
Yes, and also a lot more seriously in terms of, we've taken a lot more seriously in terms of like as an art form. I think people are much more kind of eager and interested to get themselves involved with one.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we did. About 9 years ago, we decided, let's start a podcast.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a format at first for it. And we kind of struggled through by doing a few live shows that mixed the podcast format with like comedy. Then that got filtered out, which did not work.
No.
It was sort of like we tried to sell it as a live comedy show.
Yeah.
And so we'd get people from downstairs in the pub we were doing it.
They'd
come up thinking, oh, is this comedy or something? And we were like, free comedy.
It was just
us. It was very random, and so it was a bit off-putting.
Yeah.
But in fact, it was important for us to find sort of elements of the format that we still do.
And that's what happened. We ended up going, okay, we know what we're reaching for here, and we thought we'd call it Cheapshow because a lot of the stuff we were doing, our shows were built from things we found in charity shops, Poundlands, bargain bins.
Which everyone's interested in.
And weirdly...
Especially that London is so expensive.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but weirdly what I've realised, even all these years later, there's still not a podcast that does the same content. It's like everything's movies or true crime or, whatever. And then we were like, well, come on, there must be other podcasts who go to charity shops or look for cheap food or... Because but no...
It's probably why you've lasted so long. You've lasted for 9 years.
Well, we should mention the elephant in the room, which is a load of swearing, nonsense, and sort of mania on the podcast.
Well, the way I like to describe the podcast is imagine the sitcom Bottom smushed together with Esther Ranson's That's Life.
Oh, wow.
So if you can imagine Bottom and That's Life, or like, I don't know, like Derek and Clive and That's Life, it's that kind of vibe where we basically play exaggerated versions of ourselves in the podcast, where I'm hyper neurotic and a control freak, and he's a lazy wastrel.
How did you guys meet?
Doing stand-up
comedy.
comedy.
Doing stand-up.
Yeah.
There used to be a comedy night in London at the Camden Head, the one in Angel, not the one in Camden Head.
The one in Camden Passage in Angel.
Passage.
And they had an improv group there, the Laughing Cavaliers.
Yes, which ran for years and years and years, and we were the dying embers of that group before.
So we had a background there in improv, didn't we?
Yeah.
I did a drama degree, and I was always into improv. So.
And I just like messing about and not having to write material. So we were
and just having a laugh, really.
Yeah, so we ended up just basically working together with that. We did a few Edinburgh sketch shows together. Again, the struggle.
Yeah.
Podcast was a nice little way. Yeah. And then there was a few years ago, about 2 years into doing the podcast, I realised we were getting more numbers from just releasing episodes during the Fringe than going to the Fringe. So it was like, so why would I want to go to the Fringe when I can stay at home, make episodes, get a bigger audience and make money?
Exactly. But, you know, as we discussed earlier, the podcast industry is becoming more and more saturated, but you have survived for so long.
Yeah.
You know, what's your advice for people who are trying to get into the podcast industry?
Don't, because we need to keep this podcast going. And the more of you out there that make them, the less people want to listen to it. So I'm going to say, don't make a podcast. Please don't. Please don't.
Especially if you're like younger versions of us.
Yeah, especially if you're like, for some reason, you want to follow in our footsteps. Absolutely don't.
No.
Never.
It is tough, though, to actually think seriously about that question, isn't it?
No, I know what the
Very
answer
tough.
is. The horrible, boring answer is consistency.
And,
because the easiest thing in the world to do is put a microphone down with your friends and just talk.
Chat.
And just talk and go, that's enough. We'll talk about Marvel this week, or we'll talk about Star Trek.
Yeah.
But the hard part is getting it seen, getting it heard, getting people to know you exist, and then consistency. It's like, if you commit to doing it, is it going to be a season? Is it going to be a run? Are you fortnightly? Are you weekly, monthly? Are you doing 7 episodes at a time?
And yes, and what the business consultant always will say, the sort of rote thing that people say is USP, you know, that you
Unique
need to
selling
have.
point.
Yeah.
But
we're just mucky boys. That's
we
our
don't.
USP.
That's what I was saying about the whole generality.
Yeah.
I think it's harder to be general in just not only in podcast space, but in the whole of the sort of internet, you know, YouTube creators, everything. It's harder to be generally liked, generally mainstreamly liked.
Yeah.
And I think we do something that is quite specific with the cheapness, but also we have this other quite specific thing, which is the bad language and sort of mental breakdowns, you know?
Basically being real, being
and
yourself.
surrealness. We should say as well, it's not just always us chatting. Sometimes we go into make-believe worlds in the podcast. So there's a depth to our back catalogue that people who are interested in radio drama might be interested in.
This is the kind of curse and the beauty of our podcast, because at certain points our baseline is we talk about cheap things. We talk about cheap food, cheap toys, cheap gadgets, charity shop discoveries, all that kind of stuff. But we also refuse to have a format. So most of the time it's like a magazine where we'll have segments.
Yeah.
And then one week we'll just go, oh, should we go for an out and about walk? And we'll grab our lapel mics and stuff and then do a walk around London in the woods.
Yes.
Or we'll do an hour-long radio play adventure. Like we've done a Die Hard spoof.
Oh,
we've
wow.
done a Indiana Jones
So
murder
that for
mystery
us,
thing.
I think you're talking about consistency. That variety and the formal experimentation has really kept us interested, and I think that's part of the reason that it keeps going as well, isn't it?
Yeah, because
if it's just the same thing.
Yeah. You
Week in,
basically
week
need
out.
a change all the time, so your audience
You need to
don't
change
get
the
bored.
chewing gum so that the flavour comes back.
Yeah, we want to say
Exactly.
minty is basically what we're saying, I guess. But
And not strawberry.
well, no, exactly. No,
Well, you funny you should say that, because that's one of your least favourite flavours of stuff.
we're not
isn't
going to
it?
get into that today because it'll just be derailed.
You know, the 400th episode will be released on the 6th of September. What can we expect from that episode? Can you give us a little tease?
Yeah, funnily enough, what we're going to do for our 400th episode is not a podcast. We decided what we would do is something similar to this, and we've turned, just for one episode, it into a visual thing.
Ooh,
so
nice.
we've got a little studio space in Harrow, we got a few cameras, we built... our set was literally cardboard boxes with tat and rubbish all over the top
A
of
little
it.
bit like the logo.
A little bit like our logo.
I
in
love
many
this
respects.
logo.
Yeah, Vora Tony, who's one of our artists for the podcast, a fan, who
brilliant.
makes the art for us.
Another thing we're really lucky is that we have devoted
Devoted.
people that work with us with the artwork. We should mention Yvonne as well, shouldn't we?
Yvonne,
We have a magazine for our podcast.
Great.
which comes out every few months. And so as a result, all those people helped with 400. So we had Vora design some of the art.
Yeah.
We've had some animation. There's a song in it. There's all kinds of little bits. So we've decided to do a 90-minute TV pilot
Great.
of Cheapshow, even though it's not really a TV pilot.
Wow, I look forward to watching and listening.
And it'll be on YouTube
To the Cheap
live,
Show.
6th of September. I think 8 p.m. we're going to do a live thing where we put it on
Brilliant.
and everyone can watch
A
it.
premiere on YouTube.
Premiere,
Yeah.
yes, that's what I believe the
Right.
kids say.